We have a couple of people just joining in, but since we are almost on the clock, I'll begin with the introductions. Good morning, everyone. A very warm welcome to the session, which a lot of us have been waiting for eagerly, around the labor codes. So, thanks for taking out time on a weekend morning. As we are aware by now, the Indian Parliament has passed labor codes, which are, the IR code of 2020, the code on special security of 2020, the occupational safety and health and working conditions of 2020, um, and the legal fraternity, as well as the various stakeholders, are all curious at this moment to understand what is in store with them because of the kind of changes that have come about. So, passing of this labor code is going to impact people across sectors for sure. Right from people who are migrant laborers to corporates to the legal bodies, everybody, including the gig economy workers that is so much in the talks, right? There is also a lot of lack of clarity and enough confusion that we have in all our minds. I, for one, as a HR professional, have a lot of questions in my own mind, wondering what to implement and what not. So, the intent of a session today is try to demystify a little bit of these codes to the extent possible. And to do that, we have a very eminent panelists amongst us. Let me begin with introducing them. Ms. Raman is a practicing lawyer in the Supreme Court and the High Court across diverse fields of law. She has expertise in handling diverse litigations ranging from employment laws, property laws, labor laws, insolvency, consumer protection, and the list is on. So she's very well acquainted with myriad of laws that apply and the skill in advising the business organizations on contracts and agreements, issues arising out of commercial disputes, joint ventures, M&As, due diligence, compliance, and insolvency laws. She has, in her tenure as a lawyer, conducted more than 1,000 cases and numerous reported and unreported judgments as well. Most recently, she was also across webinars talking on the same topic that we are trying to discuss here. She has been felicitated by the Bharat Bhasha Abhiyan in Women's Advocate Conference and was awarded with Empowered Women Award 2020 by YMCA on Women's Day. Ms. Raman, welcome and thank you so much for taking out time for today. Moving on, we will introduce Nandini Sarkar. Nandini is a director of business operations of SQL Management Services and Partner Audit Associates. She is again an ardent person who works in the field of labor law and employment advisor, POSH and external advisor of POSH and ethics and compliance champion. So, in her career in labor law, regulatory compliance, and employee benefits, she has been working with a lot of Fortune 500 companies, MNCs, and PSUs in mission critical implementation of compliance. She's been auditing a lot of these compliances for these organizations. Since 2005, she has also been part of SQL and SSAI teams, making representations to the central and state governments and thereby bringing about some policy changes that they have also made, particularly, on notifications of PF registration going online, etc. Nandini is a regular speaker on POSH and labor law compliances across different forums, and she's also helped many organizations formulate POSH related policies. In addition to all of the legal parts of it, she also is a strong believer of spirituality at the workplace. So her motivational articles around the holistic living or spirituality has been published in Life Positive magazine. Welcome, Nandini, and may the spirituality calm us down in this hyper conditions that we are in. Moving on to Advocate Venkat Ramani, sir. He is a senior advocate panel for the Government of India in the Supreme Court. He was appointed as a member of the Law Commission of India and has been appearing for the state of Tamil Nadu as a special senior counsel. Sadhya, and also as a special senior counsel for Andhra Pradesh. In addition to working with these states and a lot of work with the electricity boards as well, he also represents central government, universities, public sector undertakings, and major litigations in the Supreme Court and High Court. He was also invited to be a member of the Ethics Committee of the ICMR and several legal bodies pertaining to legislations related to welfare. He has also served as a law member of expert group of welfare legislation set up by the Planning Commission of India. Sir has been invited to speak at workshops jointly organized by the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights and International Commission of Jurists at Geneva on the 4th and 6th of March 2001. He's also associated with International Working Group. Sorry, somebody is unmuted at this point.
I request people to unmute them.
Just mute themselves. Yashwant, please mute everybody. I'll unmute myself.
Yeah, I've done that. Yeah, I'll just unmute you. Just a moment.
Yeah, done.
Yeah.
So, sir,
Please
yeah, I was just introducing Venkatramani, sir. So the last bit is he was invited to be involved in the Nepalese constitution drafting experience sharing as well. He has also been, an author of several books pertaining to legal matters, and a lot of the noted books are available, published. Thank you, sir, for taking out time and joining us today. And we bring to you also Mr. G.M. Saini. Thanks, Saini, sir, for joining in. He is an advisor in the HR, IR, and labor and employment laws, POSH and disciplinary matters to several organizations. He shares his vast experience through training programs and workshops on subjects of labor laws. And he works with bodies like IMA, DMA, HRD network, etc. He has hands-on experience and practical experience to that in understanding of labor matters, and that's what's going to be coming in handy, because we do have the legal aspect, but we also want to see what are challenges of practically implementing these. Saini sir started his career way back in 69 from Labor Commissioner's Office, Delhi, and worked in different capacities in connection with enforcement, interpretation, and implementation of the various labor laws. He has holistic experience of working with the government and public and private bodies like NPCC, Quality Ice Cream, and Habitat World. Academically, he has done an MA in sociology. He's also LLB graduate, PG diploma in labor laws, personal management, tourism, hotel management, and diploma in management. So again, another very learned member to the team. So thank you so much, all of you, for taking out time for the session today. We have over 215 participants who've already joined us, and we have about 10 or 11 of them in the waiting room. So it's a strong audience force that's waiting to hear your views around the topic. So as we begin, may I pose my first question to Mr. Saini? Given the fact that you've been with the corporate sector, sir, what do you think are the challenges that you foresee that corporate sector would be facing as we begin with implementing this?
Thank you very much. Practically speaking, at the moment, the biggest challenge is the definition of wages. There are certain inclusions and exclusions, which is making it very difficult for the employers to finally come out with the amount which is wage. Primarily, the wage has been defined as basic wage, dearness allowance, and retaining allowance, if any. And there are certain exclusions, which are not wages. But it has added some provisos that if the employer is paying remuneration in the name of some other allowances, which are excluded from the wages, if they exceed more than 50% of the remuneration, then it will be added back to wages, which is making it very difficult. It is also very surprising that house rent allowance, which is the second most important component of a wage structure after the basic wage, has been put in excluded category. If you take out house rent allowance from the definition of wages, it will make a big impact on the employer, especially in the cases of low level workers who are paid at the minimum wage rates. Suppose, for example, if the minimum wage is 15,000 and the employer breaks up this 15,000 as 10,000 basic and 5,000 house rent allowance in order to save something on provident fund and other things. Now, if 5,000 HRA is considered as excluded component, this will not be considered as compliance of minimum wage rate. The employer will be considered as if he is paying 10,000, not 15,000, though he is paying 15,000. This is one of the very important uh, aspect that the employers are facing. Then there are certain exclusions which are very difficult to understand, which, which has to be added back to wages. For example, if I read the definition of wage and the excluded components are bonus, okay, it's not wage. Value of house accommodation, contribution paid towards pension and provident fund, conveyance allowance, special expenses, house rent allowance, any amount paid in settlements, overtime, commission, etc. Now, if amount paid under these heads, they exceed 50% of the remuneration, then they have to be added back. There is another proviso. If the wages, some part of the wages is paid in kind, this may be a subsidized food, this may be some Sodexo coupons, this may be some white goods, so many things, car, company car, whatever. Then 15% of that has to be added back to wages. So we could not understand what is the purpose, reason, and practicality in having these two kind of provisions. I had discussed this with one of the members who was in this group who have drafted. Incidentally, he also could not explain the logic behind putting these provisions. So this is the today's main problem with the employers, how to define the wages. One logic is being given that employers were reducing the basic wage in order to reduce their incidental liability towards provident fund, gratuity. That is right. But the point is, if you mandate that wages should be higher so that provident fund contribution is higher, consequently, the payout on gratuity will be higher. And gratuity is always retrospective. Suppose today a person is working with the employer for 10 years and the law changes on 1st of April. Today, for example, he is paying gratuity on 20,000 basic wage. And tomorrow, because the total gross wage is 1 lakh, he has to pay gratuity on 50,000 from 1st April onwards. It will be big setback to the employer, though it will be good for the employee. Similarly, in present laws, there is no provision for encashment of leave during employment. It is only at the time of leaving the job. Now, there is a uniform cap on accumulating our leave 30 days, and any leave over and above 30 will have to be encashed every year. This is also retrospective from back date. Whatever the person has earned in the past will have to be paid on higher wage. So this is going to be, and it is a problem with the employer, and we are flooded with inquiries from the clients how to get out of this, and there is no way out. If we do some jugaad, that may amount to violation of the provision. if you try to comply with it, it is facing difficulties. Most of the employers today are working on cost to company basis. Now, if they try to implement this wage structure, the cost to company goes haywire. So it is becoming really practically difficult for the employers to design their wage structure so that they are compliant and they have no additional financial load. Now, when the basic increases according to this new definition, provident fund contribution will go high. The low class workers, their contribution will be higher. So their take home will be impacted. They'll get less now, though employer will have to pay more. So this is going to be one of the first challenge to all employers as well as to some employees who will be impacted adversely because of this new definition of wages. It should have been very simple. The mandate given to this reform group was to consolidate the various laws and to simplify them. They have consolidated various laws into 4 codes, but they have not simplified it. This is not the only thing which is not simplified. There are so many other things which are not simplified. So there are practical situations where the employers will be in difficulty to exactly implement, and ultimately they may give rise to more disputes. And we apprehend that ultimately the courts will have to decide when the matter goes to the court that what should be the wage. We feel that this definition has been designed in order to support, let me say clearly, the provident fund. It is in tune with the interpretation given by the Honorable Supreme Court in Surya Roshni case in 2019 February, that all remuneration will be wages if they are paid universally, regularly to all employees. So this wages is going to be the main issue in the beginning. There may be some other issues. Do I talk on some other issues, or do I reply to question by question?
So you could talk of another issue maybe, and then we pass on to the next speaker, and then we take up more questions coming up, sir, if that's okay with you.
The other issue, though it is humane, and I also personally support, but employers will be taking it differently. This is about the crush. All establishments having 50 employees, then gender is not described. You have to have crush. Now, employers may not be having sufficient space. So there is a provision that you can have a joint crash of different establishments within a local vicinity. Okay, if it is done, it provides you have to allow 2 visits for nursing and other 4 visits. Now, if the women worker has to visit that common crash, which may be 1 kilometer, which may be 2 kilometer, it should not be far away. How much time she takes in going and coming back and spending time with the baby, I do not know how the employers will take it. And ultimately, unfortunately, it may not impact the employment of women. Now, there is also a provision of recognition of trade union. The history in the country says there is no mutual trust and cooperation between the employers and the trade unions, because up till now, the trade unions had been politically motivated. They have not done justice to the cause of workers, rather they have done justice to the cause of themselves. So neither the employer nor the workers, they are mature enough to live together, to be cooperative and do things with the common objective in mind. So this compulsory recognition of trade union, I don't know how it will take place, because even up to now, works committee, etc., they were not successful because of the trade union. because the employer or the trade unions both do not want
ये
to
उन्होंने वो
have
लगाया
any.
वो लगा रहे टेंट.
May I request everybody else to be on mute while Mr. Saini is speaking, please?
So this may, because there is no education at any level how to work jointly with common objective. Nowadays, works are target based. If you want to finish your target within a given time, you have some time to do overtime. And this says the overtime can be done with the consent. Though even at present, consent may be required, but it is also there that if the worker refuses overtime, it is considered misconduct. To obtain consent in the face of meeting targets sometimes may become difficult. So these are some challenge. There are so many other things we cannot spell out everything in a short time. Yes, there are some good points. Strikes have been contained. The conditions which were put on public utility services, making it difficult to go on strike, it has been done for every situation. Now strike will not be easy to go. There are some good provisions that instead of prosecuting the employer just for a small offense, there is a provision of giving an opportunity to correct the fault, or there is also a provision of compounding the offense by paying some financial payment so that prosecution is not done. It will be available for a for example once in a period of 3 years, like that. So these are a few bullet points. There may be so many, but let the others also please speak.
Absolutely. I understand there are a few questions in the chat window, but I will take those questions together probably towards the end so that we don't stall the discussion that's started off. I move on to Ms. Raman, and we've spoken about the portion of wages. I would, probably request you to look at organizations from an appointment point of view, when from a hiring standpoint. Also, given that we are getting into a hybrid way of working, so there would be gig workers coming in. So, what are the kind of changes that are happening on contracts on the hiring standpoint and around gig workers? Anything that you would want to share?
Yes, yes. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for this opportunity to be a part of this distinguished panel, of course, the participants too. So before, Jaiti, before I address your question, only 1 minute I would like to take to explain the overall landscape of all the three important codes, how it has been consolidated, and how whether the huge amendments have come in, or it is only a simplification and consolidation. So first, if I take the IR code is a specific consolidation and amendment of three major acts. One is Trade Union Act and Industrial Employment Standing Orders and the Industrial Disputes Act. All the three have been major acts in the past and have brought in definitely lot of interpretations, and it has always been very, very important acts. In these three acts, if I talk about, definitely all the three have, because the Trade Union Acts from the aspect of that the strike and the recognized trade unions. So there are various changes, definitely 10%, 100 employees. So it has brought in a lot of amendments also. It is not only consolidation. And in the same way, if we look at Industrial Employment Standing Orders, definitely the threshold itself has increased from 100 to 300, because of which the labor commissioner standing orders getting the approval and all the aspects have gone in a change. Then Industrial Disputes Act, which is for every step we have been following this, and this also has gone in a change. It also because of the threshold, and also because of the introduction of the fixed term employees, the gratuity level, the period has changed, the 5 years that is gone by. In my opinion, even 240 days, which we have always been talking about, that has converted into 1 year. and 12 months in SS code 1 year, and IR code 12 months. So again, as once we talk about IR code, this has completely gone in for a change also. Now, if we look at the social security SS code, the SS code, as the name denotes, so it completely consolidates 9 acts which deals with PF, ESI, employee compensation, and employment exchange, maternity benefit, gratuity, city workers welfare, and building and construction, and unorganized workers social security act. If we have just a glance at all these acts, definitely PF has gone in a change now in the code, and ESI also has gone in a change, and employee compensation, of course, and maternity benefit has not gone in a much of a change, and payment gratuity, again gratuity, definitely the period and the introduction of a gig worker, fixed employee, fixed term employee, so again has gone in a change, and others were not implemented. In fact, unorganized worker social security was not even looked into much, even though it was passed in 2008. And third, if we talk about the OSH, occupational safety, and in occupational safety, it's a great irony. If we look at all these acts, Factories Act is one act which was being followed for all sectors. Otherwise, mines, dock workers, building and construction workers, plantation labor, contract labor, journalists, different two journalists for sales promotion, BD cigar acts. So if we look at all these acts which have been consolidated, it is called as scheduled acts. So after the Factories Act, after the Mines Act, what is happening is that every sector which wanted some regulation or some law, so for every sector there has been an act. So this definitely OSH required this kind of a consolidation. So the law for a country, when we are talking about a laws for the all industry and for all the sectors, it can't be sector wise. So because of which OSH was definitely a necessity for the time. So this is the overall landscape of the important 3 codes which the consolidates and also amends. Because as a head of the HR, as the HR professionals, you all need to basically understand the overall landscape of it, because now you are going to have a very pivotal role. Pivotal role, why I say primarily, because you are going to advise the management on their commercial aspects also, because now we have various kinds of appointments and employments which you will be offering to them, because of which the salary structure, the workforce, how you have to devise and design your workforce, and in gratuity, what kind of a change it is going to bring in, and because of which your software also has to go in a change. So primarily the HR is going to be everywhere. It is going there. You are going to be in management, you are going to be in finance, you are going to be in the IT. So you are going to be a person who is going to be needed everywhere. So because of which, now what you need to know, in my opinion, is that you only need to know where you have to look for a solution, in which act or in which book. You need not know section wise, like us as lawyers or as a consultants, as to that what every provision says. Because now let us just take a small example of definition of employee, definition of wages. So those basic aspects, that itself has gone in a change. As Mr. Saini very clearly explained, the wages, there is definitely one plus point also, minus point also. The wages was being earlier explained under different acts in different manner. Because the definition was different, it was also interpreted by the various courts differently, because howsoever it has been defined in each act, it has to be interpreted. So because of which also definitely the employers were facing the difficulties. So now it has been made uniform that in all the acts, basically the wages, it has been explained in a uniform manner in all the acts. Now let us see that. Now let me get to the question, because this thing is very vast. The subject is very vast, and within the limited time when we have to cover it, so let me directly come to the question which Jaiti has put to me. Now with regard to the appointments, definitely it requires an appointment letter to be issued, That is number one. That is not going to make a big difference. But the employment patterns have completely changed. Now, when we talk about fixed term employment, there is a fixed term employment which has been introduced now. And in the fixed term employment, all the working conditions, number of working hours, everything else is going to remain the same. The only thing is that in the fixed term employment, the employer has been given a right to specify that for specific period, that person is being employed. Any employee who is being employed is for a specific period. Why is this a welcoming step? Primarily because there is an employer who has a discretion to decide for how much of period or how much of work he requires. And tomorrow it is not going to be looked as that any dismissal, the employee runs to the court, and then whether it is malafide, whether it is not a malafide, whether the employer wanted that employee for that period, or whether he has a work, the employer has a work for that person. So all these things the management and the employer need not look at. Now the law statute recognizes this fixed term employment, which gives an ample freedom to the employer to decide as to devise a method as to that whom he wants to keep for which work, for which period. At the same time, the employee also has a benefit because this section specifically provides the gratuity. The gratuity has been extended even if the fixed term employee works for 1 year. So the minimum period of 5 years, to the cine workers, it has been reduced to the journalists, it has been reduced to 3 years. And for fixed term employees, for FTEs, it has been brought down to 1 year. And beyond 1 year, whichever period he or she works, then they will get on pro rata basis, same 15 days, but on pro rata basis, they will also get a gratuity so that their future is also to some extent safeguarded. This is number one. Number two, as the society, everything completely has gone in a huge change. The gig workers, the introduction of a gig workers. In the gig workers, it has been specifically that it is only that the employer-employee, it is outside employer-employee relationship. And gig workers there's a specific definition which has been provided so that also gives a scope for the employer. At the same time, who are gig workers and what are the gig aggregators and what is their gratuity payment, which is 1% to 2%, not beyond 5%. So all that has been provided. So whenever we look at gig workers, we also need to see the Schedule 7, which has been provided. And at the same time, and then that provides that who are the gig workers, like Uber, like any of the food beverages serving the online platforms, so Amazon. So all that, the categories have been given. That has been given in the schedule. So the aggregate, there is a role which has been given to the gig workers. There's a role given to the employer. There's also work given to the aggregators. Likewise, platform workers, wherein whomsoever work on the online platform, you can always engage them. And then they also have certain protection, and the Social Security takes care of their protection. At the same time, the employer can always employ such people. So this is with regard to the appointment. And when we are talking about the gratuity, the FTA I have already covered, but gratuity has been extended to such an extent that even the seasonal establishment, 7 days of only the 7, even if 7 days of if the seasonal workman works for 3 months, then 7 days of work, the salary, wages can always be paid as a gratuity. Likewise, even piece rated employee, for even though they also will be getting the gratuity, that has also been provided in the Act. So this is primarily with regard to the SS Act. And the another aspect is that there can be one single application for all ESI, PF, gratuity, and the filing pattern and the ease of filing it, since because there's going to be only one application. So those things have definitely been made easier. And one very path-breaking change is that PF, if there is a default, a limitation period has been provided now as 5 years. Earlier, there was no limitation provided at all, because of which there has always been a sword on the head that anytime the notice can come. So that situation now providing a limitation, that was PF was the only one which did not have a limitation, even though all other statute had it. So now that has also been introduced, which is good for the employer, of course. At least if they would know that the record has to be maintained for 5 years. So that limitation was very necessary. So now, Jayati, I will have to briefly like this, if I have to explain about IR code, it might take another 2 minutes. Do I have 2 minutes, or we will come back on questions?
We have a lot of questions, Ms. Raman, and I think it's important that we start taking those questions, because
Sure.
there's so much
Yes,
in their
yes, yes.
minds.
Please.
So
please.
maybe I begin with the first question which had come up long ago, and I'm looking into the chat. So sorry, please bear with me. So I think the question that came up was around calculation of PF. Ms. Raman, since you're speaking now, we ask you the question directly. Can we still continue calculating PF contribution on rupees 15,000, or actual wages have to be considered? Please share your inputs.
No, the actual wages, because see, the wages, when we look at the definition itself, it is 50%. And as Mr. Saini also explained it, now we have the section 2 subclause 88 defines what is wages. Now there are 3 things which has been provided in the wages. And when we look at only the basic wages as a basic wages, everything else has been provided in the exclusions, A to G. And then if the exclusions become more than 50%, it has to be added back to the basic wages, and upon which the PF has to be deducted. So because of which, now it will be a reverse calculation. Now you will calculate all the exclusion from A to G, A to I. When you add A to I, what you need to have it in your mind is that your A to I cannot cross 49% to make it easier. Your A to I, if it crosses 49%, then it has to be added back. So instead, you have to do it in reverse manner, that how much is your exclusions, then you calculate the wages, then you do the deduction of PF. This is how
Jayati, Jayati, may I come in?
Yes, sure, Nandini. Tell me, please.
So, Jayati, to specifically answer the question, none of the labor codes has touched, the existing wage limits, right? So whether it's a bonus or provident fund. So to answer the question, as of now, the maximum contribution that an employer is required to make statutorily remains 15,000 rupees. So basically, there was a lot of confusion about security agencies splitting minimum wages and not even contributing on this ceiling of 15,000. So we must all be very clear that the inclusions, the exclusions, everything as far as Provident Fund contribution is concerned, stays within the overall ambit of 15,000 rupees.
Thanks, Nandini. And thanks, Ms. Raman, as well, for adding in. There is a question on gratuity, and it's open for any of the 4 of the learned panels again. And I guess Ms. Raman was touching upon it. Is there anything specific? How can gratuity be processed now with the new wage code? I think this question has been answered. So I'm going to skip this. Unless there's a particular point that any of you think.
May I come in for a while?
I guess, Nandini, yes, Mr. Saini.
On gratuity, there you can clarify one point. The fixed term employment, in case of fixed term employment only, the gratuity is payable for 1 year or 2 years, 3 years. For all other employees which are employed on, for example, say on retirement age basis, the gratuity will still be continued to be calculated on minimum 5 years of service.
Okay.
So, Jayati, there are 2 things. There's a major impact as far as the cost of gratuity payments for employees is concerned. Now, the entire definition of wage for any sort of benefit, whether it's a provident fund, whether it's a gratuity, whether it's a leave encashment, whether it's a bonus, the deciding wage is as per the code on wages, right? Correct. So even for gratuity, corporates have been used to paying gratuity on the last drawn pay, which for most corporates has been basic. And for manufacturing companies, it has been basic and DA. Now that changes. For payment of gratuity, it has to be the notional pay subject to that cap of 50%. So here corporate costs are set to significantly increase because the earlier wage for payment of gratuity, which was basic and DA, is changing. It's now going to be on notional pay, subject to the overall cap of 50% of notional pay or gross salary. So that's a major impact. The other thing is, a lot of corporates have been receiving queries in recent years on the 190 days application. So, many HR, a lot of HR comes to us saying employees are claiming that because the company works 5 days a week, a gratuity should be calculated, continuous service should be calculated for a 5-day working company in terms of 190 days. So on that, interestingly, the code retains the earlier provisions, and it goes on to clarify that the concept of interrupted and uninterrupted service decides whether you get paid on 240 days or 190 days. So that's another important takeaway as far as the gratuity calculation is concerned. But yes, the bottom line is there's a huge impact in the CTC. So today, a lot of our clients, the first thing we are guiding them on is how do you restructure payroll? Because a lot of organizations do have appointment letters issued on the CTC model. So if the cost of gratuity increases, the government also recommended that the employer's contribution rate for Provident Fund shall come down from 12% to 10%. So that also is another CTC impact. So put together, the rates of Provident Fund are set to change. The government is proposing that the payment of Provident Fund and ESI shall be through an integrated platform. The cost of gratuity payment in terms of pay on notional salary, subject to the cap of 50% of total salary, increases cost of gratuity settlements, leave encashment in the same way. And all along, the disputes about overtime not being paid on total salary, the cost of overtime payment is also going to increase because there again, the code on wages definition of wages comes into play. So payroll CTC is set to change. A lot of clients have asked us that, will we have to reissue appointment letters? The answer is yes. The entire structure changes, the entire CTC. So, suppose somebody's present CTC says the Provident Fund contribution is 12%. So when the government introduces that the employer's mandate shall be only 10%, it's an impact on CTC. How do you make it up? Do you bring in other allowances to keep the overall CTC in place? Or do you keep it as is? So these are the questions, that payroll has to examine.
Sure. Thanks, Nandini, for taking this one up. In fact, you started off on your, relevant topic that I was coming to you. But before we get that,
may I add something
yes,
to
please.
this?
Yes, please, sir.
This the question of 190 days. It is related with seasonal kind of industries. It is not for other industries.
No, it is for all industries. So basically, the Supreme Court also brought in this section because there was a huge confusion around interrupted service and how do you take that into account. So clearly, Section 2A1 and Section 2A2 cannot apply on the same employee in one go. So therefore, the Supreme Court has, clarified that if, and which is why that section was built into the Gratuity Act, that if an employee has continuous service with the company, then the 240 days comes into play. But if the employee has interrupted services, which is not mentioned under Section 2A1, then the 190 days kicks in. So it has nothing to do with seasonal employment. It has to do with continuity of service.
I have unmuted Venkatramani sir as well. And, because we've heard the other three and sir has not had the opportunity to speak so far. So, sir, any viewpoints on gratuity? Because there seem to be a lot of question around that. Anything specific that you would want us to keep in mind as takeaways?
Yeah, just to pick up threads from these very interesting contributions. What is coming to your mind is that the government, the parliament was intent to have a complete reorientation on the labor codes, then the story would have been different. But if it's merely bringing together, like a new garland but with old thread, then the approach is again different. I think it looks more like some differences here and there, but probably without considering the larger impact on three important aspects. Now, for any student of economics and the social relationships, sociology, etc., and the famous Marx's famous theory of surplus value, which is relevant in the context of generation of capital. And also a large amount of treatises have been written on how we design a wage structure so that it is not exploitative. But at the same time, while it ought not to be exploitative, the question of freedom, of generation of social wealth is equally important. So that to have a balance between non-exploitative industrial relationship structure, but alongside with the competence, the capacity, and the freedom to generate social wealth is the most difficult job. You look at even the recent 2011 social insurance law in China and compare it with what has happened over a period of time from 1930 onwards in USA. Incremental, pragmatic, additions to the social security measures in USA. Today, we no longer live in a world where D.H. Thoran is writing it's about his coal workers in England, not about Maxim Gorky writing Mother about what happened in those days. The entire landscape of industry, manufacture, work relationship have so drastically changed. Then if you have one rule answer for all relationship, there could be a problem. Ms. Saini was right in saying that you look at some of the intricate concepts of a wage, and all of us now understand with these contributions made by the wonderful panelists, that if wage is a fulcrum of many things in the context of industrial relationships. So it is relevant for gratuity, relevant for provident fund, relevant for social security, and so on and so forth. I suppose while the definition of wages has some improvements, but has brought in by the proviso some difficulty in understanding it. I suppose if only Parliament had thought about different concept of wages for different purposes, then this issue probably could have been avoided. But we, as I said, one rule for all answers. This is the problem. I must tell you at this point of time, as far as the Provident Fund and the Pension Fund is concerned, a large number of litigation spending in various high courts and also in the Supreme Court. And the government on the one hand would like to, as far as possible, manage the pension fund, which is in a market oriented establishment, as compared to any other methods of pensions and provident fund. We are in the process of, I think, a transition from a social obligatory element of a pension or a provident fund system to a hybrid system where the market also comes in. And how it's going to work, it's yet to be, not yet clear. So keeping all that in mind, I think before I go into some details, just to share some broad insights. If, as I said, the Parliament intended to bring in radical departures from current disparate legislations and want to put them on together into one common platform, then I think we should have looked at the basket of new benefits that the Parliament intended to give to the workers or the employees, and the list of obligations with respect to different set of employers having regard to local conditions, etc. All of us know in the early part of a republic, the industrial tribunals and also Supreme Court were talking about region, local factors, etc. for determining the wage-bearing competence of employers. So a list of obligations probably could have been little more flexible in order that I said the freedom of wealth generation is also taken into account. How that could be done is a matter of detail. Then comes the norms for determining both the basket of benefits, anything new to be added, or altering the basket of benefits already existing. Now, all of us understand that as there are a lot of talk about how the wealth is now being 1% of the top or 20% of the top owns all the wealth, 80% of the bottom owns 1% of wealth, whatever it is. You find it almost all over the world. You go to USA, it's the same story. So if at all, if for a new social security measures, having regard to either the inadequacy or the need to add on more, it would have been better if the additional social security measures are carefully drafted into the law. why I want to say this, because I was part of the drafting committee of the building and construction workers legislation. And we had considerable difficulty in understanding the complexities of this domain of work. And while the board concept was brought in precisely because we cannot have a construction worker getting a benefit from a particular employer. Now, today I find in the social security law, all that has been done is you bring in various disparate establishments and put them together under one common framework. How do you really connect them, and what kind of social security benefits would be, for instance, dock workers or the Mathari workers in Bombay or the unorganized workers? So there is different kind of establishment, but how do you really enable them to determine norms, one for identifying or prescribing conditions of employment, etc., and the additional benefits or the new benefits to be given? I find that the code is completely absent on that. It's very broad enough in saying that the board or some advisory body or appropriate government will look into it. And then the next aspect is, once this determining norms are also not clearly spelled out, then we have the procedures for dealing with them, which also seem to be more or less model on the current framework of legislations. I don't see any departure from it. Then we have the same procedure for appointment of members of these bodies, and the kind of, again, looking at the penalty provisions. Mr. Saini made a very important observation earlier that somewhere you find that instead of penalties and prosecutions, we should probably, the penalty aspect has been brought in. I'll just deal with that a little later. So for me, more importantly, I think the new labor codes, while they consolidated them, instead of going back to the old methods of dispute resolution, we have the Industrial Tribunal, National Industrial Tribunal, and a very loosely hanging arbitration procedure, where the law says it will not be subject to the arbitration law. There will be a considerable question as to what would happen to an arbitration. You know, when the works committee is a failure, and what kind of arbitration procedures will be quick, efficacious, and therefore I thought a more broad-based mediation and very effective, where I was thinking that why not use the talents available in the law schools and various universities, and why not involve the broad civil society in a more structured way, because that takes me to a larger question of the very adversarial model on the basis of which you can all these dispute resolution models are proceeding. So adversarial model, even though the law says lawyers will not be part of the adjudicatory process, I think that hardly makes a difference. As long as we have an adversarial model, which will definitely involve time in the investment and resources, and with hardly any guiding criteria for the dispute resolution procedures, I think we'll be still going back to the pre-consolidation, pre-codification periods. These are some broad reflections I thought I should share with you. But just to pick up one of those very important specific points, like the wages issue. I think the definition of wages with the proviso is going to be problematic. Then how would even a very considerate employer would be able to manage the balance between the real wages and those clauses A to I? And as I said, if today Government of India is mulling over a pensionable salary and a higher salary as far as payment of pension and contribution by employers, that's a matter pending in the Supreme Court. So given all this, I suppose it's important that the definition of wages is articulated with specific reference to each one of the basket of, basket of what I call the benefits which is being given to the work sector. So that will be a very important progress that can be made. I'm sure we'll be able to articulate that. And I do not think that there could be any reason for disagreement if we have a distinct articulation or concept of wages for distinct categories of benefits. So I'll probably end at this, broad reflections and pick up questions.
So I think there's one question which is here, and then I will move on to Nandini and seek her inputs as well on the topic. So one question, sir, that has come up is a lot of organizations have this concept called annual variable pay or performance linked pay. Now, does that get included into the definition of wages? Because it's dependent on performance. You have concepts of sales incentive. Uh, does that get included into concept of wages?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. The definition of wages probably has been brought in by some slight changes, keeping in mind the lots of judgments and pronouncements by courts on these issues, and they have varied considerably. But I thought that some of these what called peripheral issues, like if somebody has to manage or would like to be a little more kind, good, etc., then how do you manage it? There's going to be a problem. And I think your question will have to be answered in the negative, saying that the code does not really have a very clear answer to it. But I suppose if you read the wages technically, if you go back to the definition of wages technically, I think there is still a problem.
Just 1 second, sir. May I request the
Yes.
others to go on mute, please, while sir speaking, because we can hear a lot of utensil noise as well coming in.
I was trying to understand why, while on the one hand, certain components of payments, such as bonus, etc., conveyance allowance, ought to be excluded from wages because that will be unmanageable. I can understand that. But then, while the proviso brings in this concept, I think that's where the complications is going to arise. And if the proviso does not exist, the object for the proviso probably could have been brought in by a very distinct principle that even so far, in addition to those A to I components, the contributions made under those components would add up to the total emoluments of a worker or an employee. How do you really pick up something from out of that and add it only for the purpose of, let's say, gratuity, add it only for the purpose of pension, or add it only for the purpose of provident fund, so on and so forth? I suppose instead of the proviso, we would probably require a very clearly articulated separate provision, which then would clarify all these issues.
So, Jayati, if I may come in on this point, there is an
Sure, please.
existing precedence under the ESI Act in how do you handle variable pay. So the ESI, Act says that any variable pay, if it is paid for more than 2 months at a time, shall be construed as wage attracting contribution. So my company tends to believe that because the PF Act and ESI Act is not going to undergo a major change, this will become the benchmark for treating variable pay. That variable pay or any pay head, by whatever name you call it, if it recurs for more than 2 months at a time, then it will attract contribution.
That's right. No, the question is, since it has been there part of the earliest law, now has the current law brought any difference in regard to the new, as I said, the new basket of obligations? So why 2 months? Why not 1 month? Why not some other period?
Correct.
So these questions will always arise because after all, the law will have to fix some criteria, some norm somewhere.
Yeah.
So questions always arise in the court. Why do you have a cutoff date? Why do you have a ceiling? Why do you have this prescription and so on and so forth? Those questions will be answered by the court, probably depending upon the facts of a particular case or the philosophy of the law. So when you talk of ESI, we have a long history, right? And looking at it in isolation from the other benefits, social security benefits. If you look at it purely as a healthcare or a medical benefit issue, I think we should have a certain amount of latitude. And if 2 months or 3 months, 1 month, I don't think that should be a problem. When it is coupled with some other components of benefits, then it's going to be a problem. I agree with you. There is a considerable need to disassociate or disengage the medical or the healthcare benefits from yet another benefit or any other basket of benefits. I think it's important that it's be done like that.
I will just move
Yeah.
on to Nandini because she's not yet spoken in detail on this. So Nandini, just VH has been discussed, and I wanted to understand your perspective there. But can you talk a little more around the social security aspect? Because there are a lot of questions in the chat box on what will happen to the insurance contribution, because that's a part of CTC. Will it be there? What will happen to ESIC contribution? Will it be a part of wages? So more around social security, I guess.
So, Jayat, I like what you started by saying that as an HR director, your challenge today is what do you take from the four codes? And that is exactly the advice, that SQL has been rendering to its clients. So with your permission, may I focus on how the new compliance calendar is going to look like? What are the obligations that have already emerged? And then take the specific questions on ESI contribution.
Perfect. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, Jayati, while advising clients, and of course, everybody in the HR fraternity has been discussing labor codes for well over a year, we were very pointed, in framing what needs to be done in terms of a payroll impact, updating HR policies, and most importantly, updating contractor compliance. So today, no matter we like it, we don't like it, we have to live with the four labor code. The interesting thing that, our study threw up is the four codes are pretty porous. So, you might be thinking that there are four codes and hundreds of pages of, legal drafting. But when we put it down into what are the actionable points that should show in my compliance calendar, we found that there's actually, 5 or 6 things that every organization needs to focus on. And that's the takeaway. The most important, Jayati, is that the government, in its hurry to bring in ease of doing business and to make industry comfortable, has already, even before the codes have been commenced, the government has already introduced and started online compliance. Let me give you an example. As you rightly said in your introduction, there's a major focus on the unorganized work, which is a major sector of any manufacturing industry. So whether it's a home-based worker supporting a masala or a beeri industry, whether it is a casual worker, whether it's a project vendor, their compliances are now yours. So what the government, what the EPF has done, and I recall hearing one speaker saying that the government is planning to utilize the EPFO as its main strong arm, to implement all of this, and that's absolutely right. In January 2021, the EPFO has implemented and started enforcing a new online compliance right in the principal employer's UN portal. So they've introduced an option where every month, every principal employer will have to upload the work orders of every casual and permanent contractor, interstate migrant worker. So you not only upload the POs, Jayati, but you also upload every contractor's monthly wage bill and PF contribution. And the PF system will then throw up whether the compliance by the contractor has been correct or not. So do you see what has happened? If you just keep reading the notifications or waiting for the, codes to be commenced, you will miss out on a very major part of the compliance piece, because the government had already started digitizing compliance. So over the last 4 years, all the state governments have introduced online licensing. The Delhi government, the Haryana government, the UK government, for instance, has introduced one window licensing in such a big way that today, if a principal employer wants a contract labor registration, then he has to ask his contractors to have online portals where they upload their compliance documents. So, our clients have already been advised, and we've already started implementing contractor compliance for them as a major takeaway and as a major impact on the financial risk audit of the company. So, I'd like to, I started by telling you that the four codes are pretty porous. So what are the major impact points? I'd like to dwell on that first. So first of all, under all the four codes, there's going to be one new registration. Now, the government in the four codes has called out 3 online portals on which every corporate will have to register. The first is the Shram Suvidha portal, and the government is making the LIN, the Labor Identification Registration Number, as the unique identifier for any company working in India. And they propose to do this to the Shram Suvidha portal. Apart from the Shram Suvidha portal, the government has also talked about a Samadhan portal. Now, the Samadhan portal is going to be the main instrument to implement the IR code, and the government proposes to use the Samadhan portal as a place where every company engaging more than 10 workers must report the constitution of its grievance committee, must report the constitution of its different negotiating unions or negotiating councils, and significantly it allows any private sector or central government employee to directly raise a grievance on the government portal itself. So here the government seems to have taken a leaf out of the SHE portal. So post the introduction of the Sexual Harassment Act, the implementation has only got tighter over the last 4 years. And over the last 2 years, we've seen various state governments introducing a SHE portal where each company is supposed to report and record the constitution of its POSH committee, as well as report on the cases that they've received and how they've dispensed with it. So first, there's a social security portal. Second, there's a Samadhan portal through which the government plans to implement and enforce the IR code. And thirdly, they speak about a contractor compliance portal, which they have already implemented in January 2021 through the EPFO. All the 4 codes require a fresh registration, like I said, under the social security portal, followed by state specific. So there are corporates that come under the central labor jurisdiction, and most private companies in India today fall under the state jurisdiction. The Union Labor Secretary has recently gone on record to say that most of the states have already drafted their rules, to support the labor codes, and he expects the entire implementation to be online. So what are the major impact points? 1 registration, 1 license, and 1 return for all codes. Very interestingly, the codes and the rules at the central level, that the principal employer will no longer be required to register under the Contract Labor Act. Only his contractors will be required to register. There also, for the first time, the government has brought into play that the contractor having a pan-India presence can apply for a pan-India license. This is ease of doing business because, industry struggles with contractor labor licensing in a major way. So today, any contractor having a pan-India presence, go and get yourself a pan-India license. If you are engaging project vendors or casual vendors, they have to apply for a work-specific permit. The employer is no longer required to register once this is in place. So the one definition of wage, as I also spoke in my opening remarks, the one definition of wage means that any employee benefit today, whether it's a provident fund subject to the overall cap of 15,000, the ESI was always payable on gross wages. The gratuity benefit, the leave encashment or an overtime payment, all of it gets plugged to this definition of wages. Very interestingly, for the first time in India labor laws, the definition of worker and employee have been segregated. And what could be the reason? Very interestingly, the definition of worker has been tagged to people working in industries, whereas the definition of employee has been tagged to people working in establishments. So as the rules get drafted and different states come out with advisories, it would be very interesting to see how this impacts raising of industrial disputes. The changes in the EPF contribution rate from 12% to 10% is another major CTC impact. And the major financial risk includes the social security contributions of casual workers, home-based workers. Now, among a lot of our clients, who are, say, in the spice industry or in the beer industry or industries that engage home-based workers, they will have to bring in these people under the social security net. Interestingly, the principal employer's PF and ESI obligation is set to become twofold. For your regular contractors, you have to ensure their PF and ESI compliance centrally under the central EPF and ESI. But for home-based workers, gig workers, and unorganized sector workers, the government is proposing to set up state-level provident. So on the one hand, you will be reporting compliance for your regular contractors to the central government, which is the EPF and ESI. And on the other hand, for the casual vendors, for the unorganized sector, you are required now to report compliance to the state governments. So that, makes your compliance responsibility dual. And it's all going to be online, and it has to be month on month, because again, I'm reiterating that in January 2021, the EPFO has already made this live and enforceable. Another very interesting inclusion is, the definition of contract labor has been liberalized at one end. So it's no longer, contract labor and manpower supply is no longer a dirty word in the Indian labor lexicon. It's perfectly legal to engage people for fixed terms. So the earlier, disguise of 240 days is done away with. You don't need to disguise contracts, under 240 days, because government says fixed term is legal, provided all social security benefits are paid proportionately. So if a fixed term employee is working even for 2 months or 3 months, the gratuity will become payable for those 3 months, irrespective of the tenure of service. The other thing is, for the first time, the definition of contract labor recognizes the supply of manpower and makes it legal. It also goes on to say that the regular employees of a contractor who have appointment letters and who enjoy PF and ESI benefits will not be treated as contract labor. So do you see how sweeping and how liberal the whole engagement of contract labor has become? However, this comes with one major obligation, that you have to digitize contractor compliance, any contractors supporting you, and how is the government planning to see whether you're compliant? The PF and the ESI had already introduced a system of checking the Form 26Q, and the ministry sources tell us that this is going to be carried forward. So the Form 26Q is an income tax return on TDS on contractors, which is filed by every company in India today every quarter. So what the PF and ESI departments propose to do is, they propose to look at the list of contractors in your 26Q quarter on quarter, and every contractor who makes an appearance in that list has to have his PF and ESI credentials checked by you. That includes home-based workers, gig workers, and platform workers. So, a lot of corporates tell us that, we are not aggregators. So how does the whole gig workers thing impacts us? It impacts you because so many of you engage self-employed professionals. They are considered to be freelancers, say trainers, architects, interior designers. They are gig workers. Tomorrow, you will have to report their compliance, Jayati, right in your UN portal. So do you see how the magnitude of, your compliance towards contractors increases? So on the one hand, the government is saying it's perfectly legal, engage people on fixed term, have as much contract labor as you want. But on the other hand, they want you to keep track digitally, and they want you to upload these details directly into the UN portal. So that calls, for a lot of scrutiny. So today, over the last 1 year, all our clients have examined their Form 26Q, have done the financial risk audit to be better prepared, to face what is coming. Inclusion of interstate migrant workers. I want to share with you that many of our manufacturing clients have already budgeted for the journey allowance. So the code goes on to say that if a migrant worker has entered another state on his own volition, and after entering that state, if he has, shifted even to another establishment, still the principal employer is liable to pay journey allowance, which is an annual affair. So that is, that is a cost to compliance, and many of our manufacturing clients have already budgeted this for 2021. So we've taken that step forward. The other thing is, for manufacturing companies, the entire ID system is set to change. So, now the government requires that the contractor's ID, apart from bearing his UN number and ESI number, must also bear his state of origin. So the entire system of IDs is set to be overhauled. The other thing is sales promotion employees. Earlier, sales promotion employees compliance was restricted only to a few sectors like pharma. Now it's for everyone. Any sales promotion employee in your organization has to be recipient of certain benefits, and you have to maintain registers and proof to the government. So that's an added compliance. Sales promotion employees were earlier restricted to a few specific industries. Now it's across the board. Then,
Nandini, I'm sorry to interrupt. Maybe we'll have to, close your discussion, because we have about 15 minutes left, and there are questions that are pouring in for all of us. So maybe just a couple of minutes,
okay,
and then we take the questions.
Sure.
Sorry.
Jayati ma'am, just one thing, since we have quite a few people out in the session, and some of them, they would like to ask live questions. I see a lot of hands over here, so that can be also taken.
Yeah,
Jyoti
we'll
ma'am.
take a couple of live questions first and a couple of questions after that. So, yeah. Yes, Nandini, waiting for
Absolutely.
you.
Thank you.
Oh, Jyoti, you want me to say something?
Yes, your closing remarks, you were continuing on something and I just interrupted in between. So, please.
So, clearly the three major impacts of the four labor codes are A, the payrolls and CTC structure is set to change. Cost of benefits is set to go up. The other thing is that contractor compliance is now going to be magnified and you have to report compliance online. The third is working hours. Like working hours, they are even allowing you to work 16 hours a day, subject to the overall cap of 48 hours. Women are being permitted to work night shifts. So these are the three major impacts across all four codes. Over to you, Jayati.
Thanks, Nandini. And a lot of changes. Wish we could continue. And somebody's in fact asking me, can we extend this session? Because honestly, didn't want to cut you in between. Particularly, I think the point around women on night shifts was something that has not been yet spoken about, and maybe we can take it up in one of the questions. I'll just
Yeah.
request the people who have raised their hands. Salil Sharma. So Yashwant, would you want to
Ye-
unmute him and
Yes,
get
yes. Salil, you have been waiting for a long, would you like to ask the question? Thank you.
Yeah, my question was that in the manufacturing setup, when you have the peak season, lean season, all things are there. So how is the seasonal industry getting affected by any of the new labor codes or new codes? Because nothing is very mentioned very clearly in any of the code about the seasonal industry.
So, Jayati, can I take that question?
please do.
Yeah.
So, two things are set to change. One is I request you to kindly, sit with your payroll team and ask them to open that UN portal for you. So I just mentioned to you that the EPF has already started enforcing that any vendor that works with you, and if the seasonal workers, even if they are being hired directly by you, the PF and DSI compliance for seasonal workers also now is a must. The payment of gratuity to seasonal workers was always a part of India labor law. That continues. The third angle, that gets added to seasonal workers is you have to ascertain whether they are migrant category workers or not. If they're migrant category, then getting those IDs issued for them and ensuring benefits under the interstate migrant worker come into play. So these are the three things, that you'd have to look at as far as seasonal workers are concerned.
So there is no major difference between earlier what was applicable to seasonal and regular industry, and now also there is hardly any impact.
No, the major change here is online compliance reporting. So what they are now doing is that you enter the UN portal. The moment you are issuing a contract for seasonal work, you have to upload that contract right into the PF portal. And once the work is over, every month you have to upload the wage register and the PF contribution. This did not exist earlier. It's been brought into play now, and it's all online.
Any other inputs,
Thank you.
Mr. Saini, Mr. Ramani?
Yeah.
Only one line I would like to add upon the answer which has already been given by Nandini. Only then the seasonal employment, the gratuity will be for 7 days.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
the calculation for it will be for each season, 7 days will be taken as a base for gratuity payment.
Mr.
Okay.
Venkatramani also was saying something.
Earlier, the courts are flooded with all kinds of intricate questions. What is a seasonal employment? Whether a contract labor is a seasonal employee, right? A piece rate worker is a seasonal employee, all kinds of things used to come. I suppose with the expanded scope of contract labor, contract workers, etc., there'll be some element of clarity on this. Beyond that, I don't think there's any big shift or paradigm shift as far as seasonal work and their obligations are concerned.
Mr. Saini, I saw a couple of questions popping up all around the same direction. What is the impact going to be on the IT industry or the tech industry? Were the questions that came up. Are there any specific impacts that you see there?
I think that any industry is separate from any other industry. They are working, they are employer and employee, they are working for a manufacturing some goods or providing some services. There is nothing special mentioned in any of the codes about the IT industries. They are taken as any other industry. So nothing is special about the IT industry in the codes. I have not noticed.
So, Jayati, one interesting thing came up during COVID, that, irrespective of nature of industry, the contract labor registration was not being issued unless even IT companies came up with model standing orders. So this is, one dichotomy that we see between the code and between the actual operations that the state governments are rolling out. So for the benefit of the audience at large, you have to ignore this limit of, 300 workers to publish a standing orders. Whether you're manufacturing, IT, or any service sector, today the writing on the wall is very clear. State governments have already implemented. Every company in this country has to have model standing
A
orders,
standing order.
and that becomes the basis. Yeah.
And in fact,
Ms.
as far
Raman.
as I am concerned, the only change is that it has been
On the-
taken out from the manufacturing activity, from the factory. In that, there is a exclusion to IT industry. And secondly, standing orders, of course, that is applicable to IT industry also. Other than in Karnataka, they have made an exemption. All other states, standing orders, that has to be with the threshold.
No, actually, ma'am, what happened, Ms. Ramani, during, you'll be surprised to hear that while we are handling these issues operationally, contract labor registration renewals and licenses were denied pan-India because, during COVID, there was a situation of hire and fire. So the government, all the state governments have now linked the issuance of the contract labor RC to every company, irrespective of nature of business, to have a published model standing orders. So again, this is something that, like the UN, if you read the EPF Act, the EPF Act and scheme have no mention of the UN, but today it is the nucleus of any PF implementation. Similarly, here also, this becomes, a standing point.
Mr. Venkatramani
And
had something.
also, Jayati, I think the IT industry is also going to benefit in terms of ease in working hours and working conditions. Like we said, they can go up to 16 hours a day, subject to the overall cap of 48 hours. So that's a big, liberality. Also, the spread over has been made legal. 12 hours spread over a day is now legal. So that should, greatly benefit IT companies.
Sure. Noted.
I was wondering, because when you're talking about the standing order, there's a very pretty old legislation. And it had, the idea was to standardize conditions and terms of employment. And there have been any number of litigations on this. And one major litigation which is still pending in the Supreme Court is about whether the Standing Orders Act would apply to Air India, Indian Airlines, and such other corporations, things like that. And why I wanted to talk about it is while the standing orders would still continue to play an important role in standardizing conditions of employment, terms of employment, how do you really link it with the dispute resolution processes? And how do you really link it with the expeditious disposal of issues arising out of standing orders? I find there is some lack of clarity on that. Again, we have to fall back on formal methods of handling with standing order issues. I wish that the courts have taken one step forward in looking at it from an entirely different point of view. So,
Sir,
companies
here, sir, I'd like
Maybe
to make
we
a point.
take, sorry,
Yeah.
Nandini, just
Can
can
we-
we
can I
take
go to
next
the
next
question. If it's
Okay,
okay,
but,
can we
this
go
is
to the next
important.
question? Okay, please,
Yeah,
please carry on.
just one point, Jayati, that, for multi-locational companies, the major concern all these years has been that different state governments have different leave policies under the Shops and Establishment Act. So does a multi-locational company have 45 days leave encashment in Karnataka, 16 in Kerala, and 15 in Punjab? No, now with the model standing orders, a multi-locational company can actually standardize its leave and leave encashment policies. So that's the beauty of having this published.
Noted.
On standing order, I may like to mention there is a miss in the model standing orders and in the code also. Today we are a multi-locational, multi-state organizations. There is no clause about transfer or retirement. This is very
Can
important.
be added.
Sure.
Can be added.
Because
I will
it has
just
to be
take,
added with the amendment in the code.
correct.
So, sir, we've seen, even before the labor codes, when we approached different, state governments with model standing orders based on the MNC's requirements, they were pretty open. They said, as long as there is no exploitation of labor, we are good to go with your company's policies. So that also, has to be kept in perspective.
I think the bottom line
Uh,
would still remain for the benefit of employees. As long as you're better than the act, they will still allow. But I mean, it's of course open to interpretation.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I will
And
just
on
take
this
one
contract labor
question.
licensing,
Sorry. Yeah.
on contract labor licensing, there are two spheres, central sphere and state sphere. Central sphere were already issuing contract license for the entire state combined. Only state sphere establishments, they were issuing on locational basis, on address basis. But as far as central sphere is concerned, they were issuing one registration and one contract level license for the entire state already.
Now it's going to be pan-India, sir. They are
Now
proposing pan-India, and they're also proposing work permits, which is a new in India labor law licensing.
there will
May I
be one more dimension to this pan-India. Whether this pan-India for one establishment or whether it's pan-India for different establishment the contractor is working for.
One contractor. So it's going to be pan-India for one contractor who has a pan-India operations.
No,
That is
what I
it.
said, this contractor working for one establishment only or working for different establishment and then getting pan-India.
Different.
Yes.
The bottom line is he has a pan-India presence.
Okay,
I have one
will
question. Yeah,
take the
thank you. This
last
is Anand,
question. Yeah, please.
Anand from
Can
Chennai.
we,
Okay.
kindly
Yes,
let's start
Anand.
with yours.
Yeah. The thing is like when we have to implement this code, is this tentative date has been announced by Government of India or still there is a
I think we'll
timeline
ask
is-
Mr. Venkatramani this question.
There is no notification. Yeah, I'm sorry.
It's unfortunate that the government has kept this kind of when will the act be applicable up its sleeves. And it's a very usual provision in every law. And such time the government will notify, such provisions will come into operation. I wish that had not happened in this code, because it's very important that when you shift from one, let's say, one framework of thought process to another framework, things must be very, very clear. I just give an example, nothing directly connected. When in Hungary, they had a lot of social security measures. And when they moved on to a new economic framework, the social security measures for women and children were given up. Question arose, how do we really move on to a new regime? The Hungarian Supreme Court answered it, we are moving on to a new regime from one framework to another framework. There must be a transition period when parties must be facilitated to switch over to a new regime. If we don't have a transition period, arrangements cannot be made. It's going to be problematic for both the parties. A very interesting proposition. I wish in legislations like this, the parliament had provided for a transition move where parties could have very, racially organized the movement from one framework to another, which is lacking in the law. That's going to be, I wish it is addressed properly.
But
And on this
Jayati,
note, everybody's perspective. Yes.
So, yes.
Yeah, but Jayati, it's very important.
Provides that it will be notified, and the present situation is that rules have been framed and it is still under the objections has been received, and the notification is yet to be passed, and the schemes are yet to be framed. So this is a situation as of now, even though they have said that 1st April is going to be the date for implementation, there are still yet to be many things to be done apart from the separate notification, which will give a proper date.
But Jayati, one last remark, that the government has already, even though the Supreme Court had said that Provident Fund benefits can't be linked to Aadhaar, the EPFO still found the loopholes and went ahead and linked PF to Aadhaar. Similarly, without waiting for the codes to be commenced, the government through the EPFO has already started the contractor compliance online. So please, don't miss the woods for the trees. It's already started in terms of contractor compliance. It's live on every employer's UN portal. Please go and have a look. That compliance has already started.
Sure.
Yeah,
Mr.
I agree with
Venkatramani.
you. I agree. And thank you. One more last question. The thing is like, okay, in India, most of the companies, like we follow financial year. Okay, if it is happening in April, then it will be a good and taxation, everything will follow. If we are starting mid of the year, then everything is going to be a mess up. So how do you see in this perspective?
Fortunately, Mr. Anant, they've clearly
Yeah.
said that the EPF and DSI, which are the major contributors to tax benefits, that is going to remain untouched even 1 year after the codes have commenced. So that way you have nothing to worry this way.
Jayati, hi, myself Dhanashri. Can I take a question in case it's okay?
Unfortunately, we are really running out of time, Dhanashri, but if you can keep it short, maybe we just take one last question and that should be
Yeah,
the
thank you.
closure.
Please, I would
Absolutely, ma'am.
really
I think this is
appreciate.
the last question. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, please.
Yeah. So thank you. It was really nice and an informative session. Thank you, Nandini ma'am, Shanta Raman ma'am, Venkat sir, and Saini sir. It was really good. I have one question. So basically, I work as an HR professional in development sector. I work for an NGO. So the thing is that the type of recruitment which happens, it is of community mobilizers. So these people are semi-skilled or unskilled workers, and they work with remote areas in rural areas. So when at an organizational level, when it is considered from an audit and an documentation perspective, Nandini ma'am, can you just explain about this Shram Suvidha portal? Can I register over there for from a company perspective?
Yeah, so very quickly, there are two ways you can register. So these are casual workers, right? You're recruiting them from rural areas.
Yes,
now today, it's very easy. Right at your entry gate, you can issue them a PF number and ESI number. You just need an Aadhaar. So before recruiting, tell the manpower supplier to only bring people who have their Aadhaars, or have a tie-up with the local Aadhaar center, that if some casual worker comes without an Aadhaar, you can quickly send him to the Aadhaar enrollment center and get his Aadhaar number. Once the Aadhaar is in place, the PF and ESI can be generated at the gate. And the good news is today the threshold of 20 workers does not apply. You go online to the PF and ESI portal. Even if you have 2 workers, you can register them.
Okay, sure. Thank you. Thank you so much.
That having been said, we are really out of time. I'm really sorry for this. There are plenty of questions that are waiting. What we'll try and do is we'll post the videos live so that you capture most of the information that we could. And trust me, this had we got an opportunity of stealing more time from our eminent panelists, we could have continued for a couple of hours more. It
Jayati,
was
just one suggestion. I'm sorry, just one suggestion. The questions that have been put on in the chat,
right,
if they answered, and maybe you could just publish something on your.
We'll try and do that. I'll try and do that.
Thank you, Priyamni, for the suggestion also. Thank you.
Thanks.
Rohit, maybe I know you've been raising your hand. I can see that, but would be unfortunate. There are others as well. So,
just a question, please. Just it's a 1 sec question, if I can ask.
Please tell me.
Thank you so much, Jayati. Thank you, and thank you everyone, Nandini, Madam, Shantaji, and Venkatramani. It's really was a very wide information, and you all are lighten us up. I'm just working in a very small organization. I just wanted to ask, because whatever the discussions happened, probably this discussion is silent on some shift allowances, the company which is are working on 24/7 basis or the overtime. So what do you think, like what these allowances will be included in the exclusion for the wages?
Rohit, that question was there on the chat. I will put that down and we will request some of our panelists to, if possible, to share some views, and we will publish the answers. Because if we go into that discussion, this can extend for a couple of more minutes. I'm sorry, we have to end this at this opportunity. Really sorry, everyone. I wish we could continue. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for taking out time, and huge appreciation to Venkatramani sir, Saini sir, Ms. Raman and Nandini. Thank you, all of you, for your views, for collaborating and bringing insights into this, confused world of the new labor codes that we are entering into. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jayati. Thank you very much. HR hacking team.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining in large numbers, the students, the professional community at large. And I urge upon each one of you to join the Hacking HR global community.
Thank you so much.
we keep on
Thank you
coming
so
up with
much.
such sessions. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
all. Wonderful
Thank you.
session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And the recording of this session will be available on the YouTube Hacking
YouTube
HR
channel.
YouTube channel, and I'll put the link on the chat window as well.
Yeah, we have in fact shared the link earlier also. We will once again put it up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nani ma'am. And thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Shantaraman
one
ji,
last
thank you.
question to,
Thank you
not
very
a question to the panelists, but to the organizers. I'm
Yes,
from
please.
Bombay
Yes, please.
and I'm not part of the Hacking HR group. So how would I be able to join this group?
We've sent you the link.
Martin, there is a Mrs. Mandeep. There's a group in Bombay as well. You can join.
Yes, there is a group there.
Natasha is the lady who looks after there. She is looking after Bombay and Pune. So there is a chapter in Bombay as well, Martin.
Yes.
So
And
how can
also,
we
we
get in
have
touch
shared the
with
link
you?
as well.
I
Martin,
will help you, Martin.
You can share the
If one of-
detail to Nani ma'am. She can
Sorry.
further share to us. Thank you.
Venkatramani
On the
sir is
lighter-
saying something.
On the lighter side, in one of the core discussions, we're talking about hacking. The difference between tracking and hacking is very fine.
Good one. Good one. That
I
is a
think it's
super
a
one,
good
Mrs.
note
Ramani.
to end on. Thank you so much.
Super show, Jayanti and team. Super show.
Yeah.
Sandhya
Actually,
and
I
Reshma,
still-
super show.
Thank you so much.